Welcome to the fourth and final in our series True Life, where we're taking some of life's big questions, thinking how they've been answered down the centuries, and focusing in each week on the answers given in the ancient teaching of the Bible and the wisdom of Jesus Christ. And my hope is to try and show how Jesus' answers to these questions are both true, credible, but also life-giving and good. We've thought about who we are as human beings. We've thought about whether there's a purpose to life, a meaning to this world. Last time we thought about what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with ourselves. And this week, finally, we're going to ask the big question: where are we going? The philosopher Luke Ferry says that the question of death is the question that has driven almost all of man's philosophical reflections down the millennia. Death is unavoidable, isn't it? There's an old Arabic story about a master and a servant who arrive in Baghdad after a long journey. The master sends his servant down into the marketplace to get some pomegranates. And whilst the servant walks between the stalls, he sees Death walking towards him. Death fixes him with a look, and in terror the servant flees back to his master and begs permission to escape Baghdad and to ride instead for the city of Samarra. Well, the master is a kind man, so he grants permission, and off the servant sets for Samarra. The master's still hungry though, so he himself goes down into the marketplace, and he too sees Death. But the master's bolder than the servant, so he strides towards Death and rebukes him. "What do you think you're doing, terrifying my servant like that?" "Oh no," says Death. "That wasn't a look of terror on my part. It was surprise. Surprise to see him here in Baghdad when I've got an appointment with him this evening in Samarra." It's hard to know whether the story is meant to make us smile or shiver, to smirk or to shudder. Death is inescapable. We put all sorts of things into our Google calendar, but as you scroll forward day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, one of those days is the day when you'll die. As the playwright Samuel Beckett puts it in his short piece, a piece of monologue, birth was the death of him. Birth was the death of him. The one thing we know with certainty about anyone who's born is that they will die. And yet we're very loath to speak about death in 21st century Western society. It's often said of the Victorians that they suppress talk about sex, but we're very open about death. Whereas we're the exact opposite, aren't we? Sex is everywhere on the screen, in our chat, but we suppress any serious talk about death. Well, over these last 3 sessions, we've been thinking about two dominant worldviews, two dominant ways the world is understood, and how they shape how most of us, if we've grown up in the West in the last 20, 30, 40 years, how most of us think. They are our religion, if you like. The first is materialism, this idea that we are what we eat. We are simply a collection of molecules, chemicals. In answer to the question, where are we going, the materialist, the atheist, says nowhere. So what they can do is shrug coldly. Bertrand Russell, again a prominent atheist philosopher, put it very simply and pretty famously: "When I die, I rot." Simple, isn't it? When I die, I rot. The worms will eat me. I'll degrade back into the soil or be cast into the flames. But when I die, that's it. Well, given the coldness of that view, it's no surprise that many sociologists understand much of our activity to be a way of distracting ourselves from death. In the aftermath of September 11th, when our mortality was thrust horribly into our faces, one thing that these same sociologists noticed was that shopping and expenditure rocketed up in the days and weeks after September 11th, particularly in New York. People turned, so the sociologists told us, particularly to power symbols, cars and houses. We wanted to buy things that made us believe we're safe, we're here, we matter. In the words of another writer, we're simply amusing ourselves to death. Most of us, though, instinctively feel that there is something more. And the Bible says that God has put eternity on our hearts. We long for something more than death. And almost every society throughout human history has believed that in some way physical death is not the end. Materialism is just unlivable. For plenty of reasons, many of which we've looked at before, but it's got no answers to the problem of death. Is it really the case that all we can do at the graveside is shrug coldly and say that's life? We, like all things in the universe, slowly dissipate and dissolve. Well, a far stronger worldview at the moment, for those of us in the UK at least, is that of mysticism. Mysticism answers the question, where are we going? By saying somewhere, maybe. And encourages us to smile uncertainly. As a minister of a church, I've been to more funerals than most, I would imagine. Two poems are often requested, particularly by those who've grown up in this mysticist culture. The first by Mary Elizabeth Fry goes like this: "Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glint on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the sweet uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die." It's well meant, isn't it? It's meant to encourage those weeping and mourning to smile. But fundamentally, it is just not true, is it? I am not there. I did not die. Tell that to the mother grieving the loss of her daughter. To the son weeping at the grave of his father. Did not die? Do not stand and weep? How can we not, in the face of such tragedy? Another poem begins like this: "Death is nothing at all. It does not count. I've only slipped away into the next room. Nothing has happened. Everything remains exactly as it was. I am I and you are you. And the old life that we lived so fondly together is untouched, unchanged." And again, it's not true, is it? Death is nothing at all. Death is something terrible, something devastating. We talk about Granny partying in the sky, Uncle Albert propping up the bar. I hope heaven's ready to receive them, we say. She's looking down on us now. She lives on in our hearts. They're all well-meant words, but are they true? And where's the evidence? What would you think if someone at a funeral tried to console you by saying, "Don't worry about Aunt Alice. I'm sure even now she's riding in Charon's boat, crossing the river Styx, just coming to Cerberus, the three-headed dog." I imagine you'd back away pretty quickly. But that's what the ancient Greeks believed happened to the dead. Or someone else comes up to you and says, "Well, no, Aunt Alice now will be in the Hall of Two Truths. I imagine, as we speak, her heart is being weighed against the shoe feather of truth and justice that was taken from the headdress of the goddess Mart." Of course, if good old Auntie Alice's heart is lighter than the feather, she'll be able to pass on. Although naturally, if it's heavier, she'll then be devoured by the demon Amit. That's what the ancient Egyptians believed about death. And we laugh at them. They're ridiculous. Three-headed dogs, feathers and hearts being weighed, demons devouring souls. And yet, is there any more evidence for our mystic worldviews? They're with us still. They live on in our hearts. They're in the autumn breeze, the summer rains. If materialism, with its answer that we go nowhere and its cold shrug, is unlivable, well, mysticism, with its answer that we go somewhere, maybe, and its encouragement to smile, but with no certainty, is grounded on nothing. To smile in the face of death is an impossible task for those grieving. And feeding them empty platitudes is no help at all. So what does Christianity say? By way of contrast, Christianity says this: where do we go? We go to God. And so Christianity encourages us to weep confidently, to weep confidently. Death is a horrible enemy, and that can't be hidden away. And therefore it's right that we weep and mourn, right that we hate death. Jesus himself once went to the grave of his friend Lazarus. Lazarus had died a few days earlier, and as Jesus approached the tomb, he wept. In fact, the shortest verse in the Bible, at least in the English translation, is just 2 words: Jesus wept. The word used for his reaction to death, Jesus' reaction to death, is the same word used elsewhere in ancient Greek for horses sort of snorting with anger. Now remember that the Bible teaches that Jesus isn't just a man, just a holy teacher. He is God the Son who's come down to earth. He is God and remains God, but has become man at the same time. One person, but in 2 different natures, 2 different ways of being. And so we see in his reaction, God's reaction to death. He hates it. He weeps at it. So too do we. We don't need to deny the awfulness, the pain, the tragedy, the separation, the loss. And yet we can weep confidently. Because death is a defeated enemy if we'll come to Jesus. Because it's Jesus who has defeated death. God himself who has defeated death. One of the strange things, if you read those biographies of Jesus that make up what we often call the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, is that at least a third of each account is focused on the last week of Jesus' life. The focus, in other words, is on his death. If you read a biography of a sports star or a politician, a king from years gone by, then likely just the last page or 2 is about their death. But not so with Jesus. Everything is leading up to there. And that's because Jesus himself taught that he was going to die deliberately. Ultimately, when he was stripped naked, whipped, and pinned to a cross by the Roman soldiers, crucified. It wasn't a terrible accident. Rather, it was his plan. I've come to give my life as a ransom for many, he said. In other words, he was swapping places with us. Death in Christianity is an enemy, as we've said. It is a punishment, in fact, for the selfishness, the turning away from God, love of God and love of others that infects us all. We deserve to die. It's not natural, as materialism says. It's not just part of the universe. It's an intruder. But an intruder we deserve to face. But so great is God's love that he comes down, becomes one of us, and he dies. Jesus dies, even though he'd done nothing wrong, even though he didn't deserve to die. The innocent was dying in place of the guilty. And of course, 3 days later, he rose again. When the Bible talks about Jesus rising from the dead, it's not talking about him living on as a ghost or living on in the hearts and minds of his disciples. He comes back with a real body, fingernails and toenails, hair, breath coming in and out of his nostrils, heart beating, lungs pumping. It is a bodily, physical resurrection. At this stage, perhaps you're liable to sit back and say, well, hold on, who can believe that someone comes back from the dead? Of course, no one can easily. That's as true of the ancient Jews and Romans as it is of us today. They knew that dead men don't rise. They buried enough bodies. You don't need to have been educated with 21st century scientific principles to know that dead men stay dead. And yet, hundreds of people claimed they saw Jesus risen from the dead. Well, you say that's what they would say. His disciples were committed to the course. They made it up. But why would they? Ultimately, those men paid for their beliefs with their lives. If they were willing to say, no, it's all a hoax, they could have gone free. You might die for something you wrongly believe in, but you won't die for something that's a hoax you know is untrue. Why wouldn't the Romans or the Jews, if Jesus was still dead, just produce Jesus' head on a stick? They could have crushed Christianity at source. There are all sorts of reasons, all sorts of evidences why people have come to believe in the resurrection, more than I can possibly go into now. So many, in fact, that Lord Darling, a former Lord Chief Justice of England, said that no intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true. Not myth, but true. Why is it a third of the world believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Are they all stupid? Are they all gullible? perhaps it could be that it is true. Eddie Izzard, the comedian, gave a very moving interview recently where he said that everything he does in life is trying to get his mother back. And he went on to say this: I have a very strong sense that we're only on this planet for a short length of time, and that's only growing. Religious people might think that life, goes on after death. My feeling is that if that is the case, it would be nice if just one person came back and let us know it was all fine, all confirmed. Of all the billions of people who have died, if just one of them could come through the clouds and say, it's me, it's brilliant. But they have. One man has. And he's opened up the way for others to follow. This is why I said we can weep confidently. Death is still a horrible enemy. But if we put our trust in Jesus, then he has taken the sting out of death. Instead of death being a gateway to meeting God in terrifying judgment, death is a gateway to meeting God with a royal welcome home, an entry into paradise, into heaven, into eternal life. We are all eternal. We will all live forever. The only question is whether when we meet God, we meet him as enemy and judge, or as father and friend. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet will he live. Yes, Christians still die in car accidents. Christians still get cancer. So Christians still age, wither, and perish. But even though you die, says Jesus, yet you will live. Your body may be buried in the ground, but your soul will continue in paradise until that day when God restarts the world and gives physical resurrection bodies back to his people. In 2011, Otto von Habsburg, one of the last members of the Habsburg dynasty in Austria, died. And he was taken to his tomb the way that all the Habsburg royalty have been for hundreds of years. A herald leads the procession and bangs on the door of the mausoleum and announces Otto. Otto of Austria, former Crown Prince of Austria-Hungary, Prince Royal of Hungary and Bohemia, of Dalmatia, Croatia, Slavonia, Galicia, Lodomeria, Illyria, Grand Duke of Tuscany and Krakow, Duke of Lorraine, Grand Prince of Siebenberg, Margrave of Moravia, and on the titles go. When the herald finishes, there's a moment's silence. And then from behind the doors, a Capuchin monk replies, "We do not know." And the doors remain shut. And so the herald tries, again, this time lists the civic qualities. Dr. Otto von Habsburg, member of the European Parliament, president of the Pan-European Union. Again, a moment's silence, and the voice comes back, "We do not know him." A third and final time, the herald knocks and says simply, "Otto, a mortal, sinful human being." And the gates swing open. It's a beautiful picture of the gates of heaven. We can't knock on the door and say, "Look at me. Look at all I've done. Look at how holy I am, religious I am. Look at how generous I am, wealthy I am, intelligent I am, beautiful I am." No, nothing we bring opens the doors. But if we simply bow now in this life before Jesus and say, "I deserve nothing, I deserve death, in fact, but you have died in my place to open up the gates of life," then he promises we will receive a welcome and will receive eternal life in paradise, away from all the suffering, sickness and tears of this life. Well, I don't pretend that over these 4 videos I could have possibly answered all the questions you might have, nor do I pretend that if we sat down and chatted over a coffee or a beer that I'd be able to do so anymore. But what I do want to persuade you of is that there is someone who does have the answers, and that is God himself, particularly as he comes to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Why not, therefore, open a Bible and read one of those gospel accounts? Mark is the shortest. And discover for yourself why this man who claimed to be God has changed the world. Ultimately, he came down to us in order that we might know him. And he says to us, "Come to me. Come to me with your doubts, your fears, your questions. Come to me with all that you're ashamed of. Come to me with all your wrongdoing, with all your history. Come to me with all your burdens, and I will welcome you. And in me you will find rest." That is the route to true life. And that is the answer to true life.